All right, so
and this is for the recording.
hi, Mark Gerl from Politico. Show of hands, how many people here know about Politico? How many people have used the app? Either of them, iPad or iPhone. A couple people are here who worked on this, on our series of products, and I'm not the only one. Thank you. Okay, so another poll is, I'd like to know how many people here are non-technical. Grab a beer, I might put you to sleep. So I want to start out with a caveat saying basically that what we did works really, really well for us and has worked well for us. And you know, your mileage may vary, that's the usual set of things. But I believe that what I'm presenting here has, you know, transcends our apps and politics and our data sets and et cetera. So moving along with the kitchen metaphor, I built the whole thing around the idea of a recipe. And so we're going to look at, you know, what are we making here? You know, what's our set of directions? What are our ingredients? And what do we learn from this? And by the way, I'm going quick through the slides. I will make them available, so don't have to take notes or whatever. But I'm also trying to put like an hour presentation in front of you in 25 minutes. So our primary objective was to deliver data, dynamic data, to our flagship, a new flagship app, our Politico for iPad app. And that's, you know, that was basically the whole premise of where we got to what we're doing now. As we were coming out with the new app, and we needed, and we're a 24-hour news organization, so the data's changing, you know, every 6 minutes, all day long, all the time, and you have to manage getting that to the users in a non-web approach. So we wanted to maximize our offline app usability because, well, you know, the good thing about the web is if you're connected, you're connected. The bad thing about the web is you're not always connected. You could be on a train, a plane, in a skiff, and around here that's pretty obvious, or happens all the time. So anyway, we wanted to also maximize downloading efficiency. Problem with things changing all the time on the web is you're constantly pushing tons and tons and tons of stuff down, and we wanted to optimize that, and so that our user experience would be not only fast, but would work really well for our users without having to push too much data down the pipe. Now the iPad, people don't seem to worry about it as much as an iPhone, but it turns out that this scaled really well for us later on, which I'll get to. So the anatomy of our data set, and really the takeaway here is it doesn't matter what our data set looks like, because your data is all you're interested in. But our data set was relatively simple at first. We had the concept of layouts, things that we could dynamically change, and what we called sections, basically top news, sports, those would be sections. And sections have stories, of course, individual articles, and settings. And it was a very simple initial data set. We only had 23 stories in the initial product. And so what we decided was, instead of going the RSS, XML route, and as I already mentioned, this wasn't at all set up to be a web approach, we decided to standardize on JSON. JSON's very, a little bit less verbose than XML, and you can do a lot, and you can extend it, and it works really well for us. So we used static content and then our dynamic content all within JSON, and yours can be either. So the key ingredient here was what I call our config file. This is your manifest. This is basically the single point of contact between your app and between your app in the field and the content that you have on your servers. It's the only place that has to be pretty much hard-coded in terms of URL or whatever. Everything can be dynamic from there, but you have to have a single point of contact. The config file is our directions that tells the app what to do. So it's a map of the data, and content tells where things are, has different degrees of dynamicness. It can carry static and dynamic data, things that change often, things that don't change very often at all. And so it's very easy to use this as a map to figure out what to download when. depending on what the user is doing in the app and how you decide to architect your app. So it's a single point of contact. This is our initial config file. That's the whole thing. There's really not much to it. And again, we had one section of data. The stories file is a separate file. It's, you can see that the layouts file is a separate file, and the headline stories there. So the key thing is that this was simple but effective. Worked really well. And this is what the app looked like. There's a couple of different views of the app. You can see two different orientations representing the layouts in the background there, and the story view. And I just showed off the font slider because when we came out with this, we got a lot of kudos from several of the different news organizations, our peers as well, about how easy it was to read this, how nice of a reader it was. And anybody I ever showed it to, the first thing they said was, wow, really nice and simple. And that was one of the things we were going for. So, well, the proof is in the pudding, and let's just check in on our design goals and see how we did after the first round. We hit our primary objective, which of course was to service this new application. We maximized offline usability, efficiency of downloading, because we only downloaded what we needed to download by using these timestamps, and it kept it very, very fast. There wasn't much there, but it was fast, and it worked great offline, which was great. So the fact that your device went on and off the network was transparent to the users. They didn't really care. Got updated when it could, when it needed to, when they had a network. So moving along, we evolved this system, and here's what the 2.0 version of the config file looked like. And that's not all of it. That's just parts of it. There's a lot of dots in there. So basically, it's still simple-ish. We added multiple group sections, so we grew from one section to many sections. We added another app. We added an Android. We added another platform. So not only did we add another app, we added another platform. We added preloaded cached elements, static resources that didn't change very often, but we wanted to be able to change them without having to rev the app and go through the app stores. And that was a huge, big win to be able to do this. And we added settings, including, for different platforms, different versions. And this is what it looked like. You can see there's a lot more to it. You see the sections menu there in a couple different views. You've got a new blog style view with a table of contents. You've got a whole new layout. So we've added layouts to we got this grid layout, which is 3 by 3 in one orientation, and 4 by 2 in another orientation. And we show the saved articles section, and we added breaking news alerts. So we added our own push server technology, which is kind of a separate talk to this. Anyway, so the anatomy of our current data set, now we continue to evolve it. That was iPad version 2, and Android phone version 1. And so now we continue to evolve this, and now we've got 10 layouts. We've got 35 sections, so we went from 1 to 10 to 35. We've got somewhere around close to 2,000, actually more stories, a whole bunch of different elements and new settings. So this is the version 3 of our config file. Now it's a little bit less simple. It's more complex. We've got 4 apps, 2 platforms, 1 data set. And this is, again, the huge win, is you don't want to have to maintain too many things in too many places. We've got per app layouts, per app settings, per Retina specific resources for those Retina displays. Guess what? We did this for the phone. Now it's going to scale immediately and instantaneously for Retina on the iPad. In other words, without me even shipping a new version of my app, I'm going to pipe up some Retina resources, and they'll be ready by the time that new iPad ships. I'll take questions at the end. And so we targeted also advertisements, because maybe an advertiser wanted to buy a certain section of our website and a certain section of our mobile. Mike Allen's playbook is a really popular choice there, and so they could sell that out. So we added that as part of it. Now, what's this look like now on the iPhone? So this was basically the 3rd iOS product that, major product that we released on this data set. We still have the Android, so that's 4. And it's quite complex. And by the way, Michelle, who's sitting in the office, was the lead on this project. She did amazing work. So what we did was we figured out that we've got enough data now that we don't push everything to the user all the time. And in the iPad, we did. When we had 10 sections, we pushed all that data to the iPad every time it needed to be updated. Again, very efficient, very, because it's all text, doesn't have all the weight of HTML, and it compresses really, really well. So it was efficient, but now we're talking about a phone. Phone's a little slower. It could run on an old an iPhone 3. There's, reasons for keeping it simple, and we decided to let the users just choose what parts of Politico they're interested in. So we added the read offline, settings there. By default, we gave them a few sections that we wanted to always have available on the phone and didn't want them to have to change it. And it's actually a 3-state, which is really kind of cool. You could either have whatever you want loaded up, always available, always up to date for offline reading, or you could choose to read things casually at your leisure. In other words, hit sections only a certain time, once a week, or not as often as some of the others. Or you could just say, I'm not interested in this at all, and uncheck it, and the phone will just skip right over it. So all of this was enabled via the configuration file, that map, that our data map, and it works. It works really well if you've used the phone. It performs quite good, and there's no waiting for data to arrive in the things you're interested in because it's already there. It was there to begin with, and it will continue to be there, and we only refresh when we get an update. So we tried to minimize, those things. But this also shows, let's see, the article view, a couple different section fronts here. In the case polls, we added polling to the app. Political polls are a big deal on our website. They're a frame on the web page, and we added that as a content. It's really, really small, real easy to do. And our JSON and our configuration and our timestamps and all that technology that we, all that thought that we put into, getting the original data delivered, scaled to all of these things. And really, really well. And of course, we show full screen video and the breaking news, what it looks like on the phone. And I keep showing our breaking news because I think we have one of the best breaking news approaches out there in the industry. Especially because our push notifications, you're limited by what you get through Apple and Android for that matter too. You're limited on Apple to about the size of a tweet, about 140 characters once you put all the other stuff in there as a payload. And so that's why you only get a little sentence or two, that delivered to your phone. But when you run our app after a breaking news comes in, we go out and download the whole rich, rest of the story. So you're not limited to getting your data, only 140 characters or so at a time. But I think that's worth pointing out. Kudos to us for that. So some bonus, side dishes to this recipe, that we got out of the way, and we designed it originally for the stories content, but we found out, as I already mentioned, that it adapts really well to any content. You can push down static or seldom changing resources, and again, you can control how often they get pulled down to the device just by setting a timestamp. If that timestamp doesn't march forward, then that part of the data is just skipped over. If the app doesn't need to download it, it doesn't. And this has worked really, really well for offline, as I mentioned a couple times. And it's extensible because, we're serving, and I don't know how many people are doing this, but we're serving, multiple applications on multiple platforms in very efficient ways. And we've got more platforms and more apps coming, including an Android tablet product. And it evolves, but yet you can maintain backward compatibility. And that was another kind of a surprise to us. There was a couple surprises. The layouts was a real surprise because I was able to change. We were able to change dynamically the way our app looked on the fly. Think skins, we could push that information down to the app, but the app didn't have to have a rev from the store. So we can change what the users see based on whatever criteria or whatever events we want to change them. If there was like a really, really major story, something really huge happened, we would change to a layout that only shows, say, 4 stories on the front page because you want to put one big picture, like when Osama bin Laden was killed. That was a big deal. But that's just an example of how you can use that kind of thing. And you can change, you can morph your data over time. You know, you might start out with a news layout, but later end up in a grid layout. And we've done that. And that was, again, a big surprise for us. But the backward compatibility has been a big win too. And that means I can evolve our apps, and I can add new functionality through the config file, and yet all the old apps, all the people out there who have not updated, and believe me, I can tell you exactly how many of you there are, 22,000 roughly, iPad people have not updated. Well, they're not getting the new features. Okay, we can give them some stuff, but you know, at some point you have to encourage upgrading because, well, you know, bugs get fixed, whatever. So lessons learned here about this is basically the key to this is to break your data into the right bite-size pieces. And for us it was, you know, story files, you know, entire sections of stories, because really we go anywhere from 100K to a real complicated stories file might be 500K, but it's all text and it compresses really, really well. And we use, you know, the standard compression between the server and the app. So, but we don't want to download any more bytes than the user wants, so we give them choices. That's all part of it. For us, it paid off to build a JSON watchdog process because our web team was building the JSON based on our CMS, our content management system, right, that powers the web. Well, they're also powering the mobile. So they're building JSON, but every once in a while things slip in and the JSON doesn't get formed right, so we built a watchdog process that is constantly checking the validity of the JSON files. Now our app is smart enough to know that if we download something and it fails to parse, we just toss it on the floor and get it next time around, because it'll get updated. Because the watchdog will pick it up. It'll say, hey, company, you know, send pagers and all those, you know, type of messages saying you've got a failure in the feed. Somebody will go fix it. It'll get, you know, fixed. It'll get pushed down to the app, and the user's none the wiser. They just might have had a, you know, a little bit longer of a gap, say, to update for that content. But it's all behind the scenes. So that's something I recommend. You know, you can try and think about, you know, the first time you sit down to do this, you try and think out everything that you want to do, not only what you have to do now, but what you might want to do. And that's okay, but you're better off to brace evolution. And, you know, if you have to ditch your whole thing and go with a whole new config, you could choose to set that file in another location for a new app in the future. You can obsolete your old, you know, your old apps out there. It's okay to do that, and you can use this and either, you know, carry that weight in the config file or throw out a new config file, which is what we did when we went to the major, you know, changes to add the iPhone. We just left the old config on the side, so they're both updated, but one is simpler than the other, and etc. Timestamps, we went with formatted timestamps. I think it might be better if you went with some, you know, Unix epoch thing. And also write or steal a good download manager and a good image resource cache. If you're doing anything that's downloading lots, we're talking about dynamic data, that's the topic of our talk, so it's things that change all the time. Write a good download manager, and we did, and it was costly. It took us a while to get it, but once we got it, it worked really, really well, and it's continuing to work for us across multiple products, and a good resource cache, because you don't want to keep downloading the same image over and over again. Some of these things are costly. Some of the images, you know, might be 100K, 400K, 500K, I don't know how big your resources are, but they could be big. And you don't want to download those any more than you need to. So keep a cache and manage it yourself, you know, in a way that works for your app. And we change our cache size dynamically through the config file settings. So if we need more cache space, I can change that by changing a setting in the file, and instantaneously the apps pick that up and adjust accordingly. So there's a lot of wins here. As with any good recipe, there's lots of ideas for modifications. There's lots of things you can do. Just to highlight a couple, you know, you could change, you know, skinning or color schemes or other types of visual things like we did with layouts. You could apply that to anything. You could you could define app logic or rules or behavior and push that down through some kind of a file or some kind of configuration. Same way we pull down HTML, CSS, other type resources. When we change our CSS, we can push that down, and instantaneously people who have that app that are using that are getting an update on that. So it's really nice. Bi-directional config, you could actually have some information sent back to the server from your app. You could write it all out and send it back up. And you can use it for scripting or whatever, help. So to wrap it up, as we continue to add more and more things, apps, platforms, whatever, to the mix, our design goals definitely changed. And so our recipe had to be modified to accommodate all those things. And that's why I said at some point you have to figure out what your bite-sized pieces are, and you might have to change that over time. But it's easy for you to do this. You can start out simple, and you can grow it to as complex as you want to get it, and it's easy to measure how it works. So we basically increased our data set size by 35x with almost no noticeable performance hit to the mobile platform. And so that scalability was a huge bonus for us. It really was. And with all, if you do background downloading and you offload all that, the users can be tapping all over your app, and you can just be updating it behind them however you need to, in whatever form you need to. And so these same approaches, that I showed you here through our config, just scale to everything else. We've adapted our layouts, we've adapted our sections and stories. So as we get smarter, or as we have more resources, or as we think of more things, we just know exactly where to put them in here so that they scale to the app. Now, if anybody used the app on Super Tuesday or any of the other election nights, okay, we actually push down dynamically that night specific layout information that says, hey, put up a banner here. It says we're piping a live feed. We pipe a live feed right into the app dynamically, and 11 a.m. the next day, gone. So it's a great way to get things to your app in ways that you may not even be thinking about right now. And of course, with any recipe, you may have to break an egg or two, or in my case, pull out some hair. So I wanted to just throw up some resources. We did a lot ourselves. We built our own download manager, our own image cache, but we rely on a few things out there. We started out using Agile for JSON, but evolved to JSON Kit, as many of my colleagues doing things have done. We've evolved to ShareKit 2.0, which is fairly recent, and we're not using this cache, but I just want to give it up there as Marcus Zara's stuff. He's got some interesting things worth looking at. If I hadn't already built our own cache, I probably would have grabbed this one. And on Android, you can use the JSON parser. The built-in Apple JSON parser. If you're an iPhone developer and you're using the built-in parser, throw that out and start over right away, because it doesn't perform well. Apple's stuff has never performed well in that respect. Back to the old XML parser was horrible too. But that's a little bit of my legacy experience showing. And here we go, Q&A.
So that last
Rolf.
part with the JSON parser, did you roll your own, or did you use a third party?
Oh no, I use JSON Kit now. It's real easy. It takes your JSON, puts it right in a dictionary. And in Android, you can get it right into that, Jackson, whatever the Android calls a dictionary. I can't remember what it's called. It's in my notes, but they're so tiny I can't read them. So if you get these slides, there's a little bit of notes, and they go along with a couple of these. Yes, next question.
Yeah, I was just curious if once you get it on the config file down, are you rolling it into core data once it's parsed out?
No. Our data, like I said, our data changes. Our top news changes like every 6 minutes. But the config file is not necessarily written every 6 minutes. It's written every 10 minutes or earlier. So there are different boundaries for different things. Polls change maybe once a day, but the poll results, which we actually show, change all the time. So when you update your config, you're getting new polls, which is real small. Basically, the short answer is core data wouldn't be good for this. It would be a waste of time, because you're throwing things in, you'd be taking them all out, because they're all getting replaced all the time. We did it with files. Okay, Okay, each one of our stories files, each one of our cache images, I don't want to pile that up into a database. It's so much easier for me to maintain it in the file system in the right place, doing the right thing for the platform in terms of temporary and cache locations. Core data would be a huge overhead, and it would be a nightmare to try and debug problems. We do use core data, and we use it for saved stories because that has to stay around for a while. The users get to choose that. You know, they not only get to choose what they keep around in the saved stories, but because our data is evolving, we have no more than 30 stories filed per section at any one time. So something that's on the T1 slot on the headline news right now, 3 days from now will be the 30th story. 4 days from now it'll be off the list. So our data comes in and out of our app in 3, 4, 5 days. It's gone. So it doesn't make sense to try and keep any of that because it would be changing all the time. Now, of course, one of our biggest problems will be how will we search or how will we do things like that on the device without doing some kind of core data indexing or building something. But I don't want to spend all my time spend all the device's CPU time keeping that stuff up to date. So there are some big problems that go with dynamic content that's constantly changing. There's some big problems with that. Next question. Yes?
In terms of actually rendering the dynamic content?
Yes.
Are you guys using web views or?
It depends. I can actually bring up a slide, I think, for this. Doesn't go backwards very well, does it? So on the iPhone, these are all web views. That's a web. Well, that's not a web view. That's a list. That's a web view with some JavaScript to submit. That's a web view, and an article view. That's a web view. And if you haven't seen you can tap on that picture, it goes to a full screen image. We do some really interesting things in web views. Michelle worked her butt off trying to get that thing to really be tight. And we support pinch zooming for text resizing, but we also have a really nice size slider, and they go hand in hand. It pops up automatically to let you know it's there if you want to use it. We have a lot of interesting things. On the iPad, we have a combination as well. This is a web view because you can see it's linear, vertically. The original articles were not web views, and what we call our news stories are done in the 3-column newspaper layout. That is not a web view. You swipe to change pages, just like you do in some of the other apps, but they're not web views. You got the little page indicator you can barely see down there, but the little dots, so if we have a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, I'm over, but I'll be around. I've got business cards. If anybody has any questions, I'll send anybody who wants the slides or give them to Pete to upload if he has a place to put them.